Good morning. We are gathered here this morning for a school-wide kickoff to our theme of Avodat Hashem. Though we've started to learn about Avodat Hashem in our individual Beit Midrash groups or in senior Gemara classes, we felt it was fitting to join together as a community to mark the start of what's going to be a year-long exploration of ways of deepening our connection to Hashem. This morning's programming is dedicated to the memory of JJ Greenberg, Zichrono Livracha. JJ was born in Riverdale. He attended SAR Academy, and in 2002, at the age of 36, he was bike riding in Israel when he was fatally struck by a car. When SAR High School opened in 2003, the founders of the high school felt that it was appropriate to dedicate the school in his memory. JJ is my first cousin. My son Natan is named after him. And it is meaningful for me each day to learn Torah in a building that's graced by his name. We're going to do two things this morning. First, JJ's father, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, is going to share some thoughts with us about JJ and about Avodat Hashem. It's one thing to talk about an idea theoretically, but it can be a lot more meaningful to understand how somebody really lived that idea. Then we're going to break into groups to do some learning about the theme of Avodat Hashem and how it appears in our tefillot on the Yomim Noraim. Before I introduce Rabbi Greenberg, I'd like to share one brief story with you. The last conversation I had with JJ was a few weeks before he died. I was living in Manhattan at the time, and JJ would call me up periodically to tell me when there was something going on that he didn't want me to miss. So he called me one night and told me there was supposed to be a really amazing meteor shower late that night. He said, wake up at 3 a.m. and you should go see it. So I figured I'd do that. I set my alarm for 3 a.m. It went off. At 3 a.m., I poked my head out the window. I didn't see anything, and I went back to sleep. I called JJ the next day, and I said, what were you talking about? There was nothing going on at 3 a.m. And JJ said, sure there was. I went to Central Park, and I saw the meteor shower, and it was beautiful. What we've been discussing in Beit Midrash groups and classes is that there are many ways to cultivate a relationship with Hashem. Something that I learned from JJ is the importance of going out of our way, of stopping our routine, to really appreciate the beauty of the world around us. We're now going to hear from Rabbi Yitz Greenberg. Rabbi Greenberg is a leading Jewish thinker and activist who, with his wife Lou, was one of the founders of SAR Academy. Rabbi Greenberg is a pioneer in Holocaust education and commemoration, as well as in Jewish-Christian relations. He's the founding president of Klal, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, which seeks to create dialogue among Jews of different denominations. Rabbi Greenberg has published numerous books, most recently Sage Advice, a commentary on Pirkei Avot, which applies its teachings to the challenges of our world today. We are very honored that Rabbi Greenberg is here to address us this morning.
It's, of course, it's a privilege to talk with the students of SAR High School, and it's particularly moving because the school is dedicated to his memory. As you heard, JJ died at the age of 36. He was riding a bicycle alongside his brother and a friend. They were riding from his brother's home in Ra'anana to his sister's home in Zichron Yaakov in Israel. And 5 minutes out, near Binyamina, a teenager with a learner's driver's license, but without an adult monitoring in the car, ran a traffic light and struck him. His death was established by brain death criteria, which meant it enabled him and us to donate his organs. The heart, unfortunately, was too bruised to be used again, but his corneas restored the sight of an aging doctor and of a budding young artist. His kidneys saved the life of two people who were both near the end of the dialysis treatment that could no longer help, and his liver was transplanted into an Arab father of 4 who was 24 hours away from death. Afterward, as we reflected back, I actually collected some material. I thought I might write a book about his Avodat Hashem. That's what I want to talk about this morning, because I was struck that it was very different in tone than much of what our community tends to do when we think of Avodat Hashem, and I think it's an emerging and a very powerful style, as it were, or way is the way I like to think of it. It's a way through life. It's a derech of Avodat Hashem, and I would, as I see it, I would say it's the 7 ways or 7 dimensions, approaches in Avodat Hashem, which add up to a very distinctive, I think, emerging contemporary derech of Avodat Hashem. I start with the fact that he was not an external dress or formal dress religious person. No black hat or beard for him. He dressed like regular, I would say cool. He wore grunge before grunge was in, wore his cap, baseball cap backwards before baseball caps were worn backwards. The question is, of course, why? Why no distinctive uniform? I'm a religious person. I think it's because we live in a time of profound divine hiddenness. Charles Taylor, and it's an important book you might want to look at, wrote a book called The Secular Age. We live in a secular age. We see nature through secular naturalistic categories. We don't experience and don't see visible miracles. In fact, no visible presence of the divine in public life. A very different atmosphere than one reads in the age of the Tanakh, for example. So, in such an age when God is profoundly hidden, how do we meet God? And we who are rooted and connected, how do we encounter? So the answer is not so much in public, not so much maybe even in synagogue or prayer, but following Chazal's, the rabbi's insight, in a time when God is less visible or more hidden, then one encounters God in discountering the image of God that's Tselem Elokim. You recall the Torah's words, Vayivra Hashem Elohim et Adam, B'Tzalmo, B'Tselem Elokim Baroto, that the human being is created in the image of God. This is the most godlike creature, resembles God in mind, in consciousness, in capacity, in love. And of course the Gemara says, and this is a fundamental of our tradition and of our religion, because the human being is in the image of God, every human being is endowed with the dignities of infinite value. They are beyond all money, their preciousness. Every image of God is equal, and every image of God is unique. But to see that, to encounter that in a fellow human being, you have to really focus. You have to really care about them. You have to get connected enough to experience their uniqueness, their equality, or for that matter, their value. And that's the point. If you can do that, if you can go deeper into this relationship, if you can see people at that level of connection where they are at Tselem Elokim, that's the moment when one encounters the hidden God as well. That's the moment one encounters Shekhinah. The Gemara mentions, for example, that when you visit the sick, the Shekhinah is at the head of the bed. When you feed the hungry or show hospitality, when you comfort the mourners. Yes, the Gemara says, when you make love, the Shekhinah's presence, if you can hit that level of depth where you feel the connection of an image of God. And I guess that is really where he found his derech Avodat Hashem. He loved people. He reached out to them. He saw them as Tselem Elokim, and not just the stars and not just the people up front, the people in the back, the outsider, the one you overlooked. I remember at Jewish Life Network, Steinhardt Foundation, where he was the executive director. One night, working late, he had a conversation with the cleaning woman who mentioned to him that in cleaning up and picking up some staples, she had punctured her finger. And that next day at the staff meeting, gave a whole talk about how people have to be aware who cleans up, who makes this, what is their life like, what is the very surroundings we take for granted, but equally important, then what does it mean to drop a staple or not to be thoughtful and not to think about the garbage or the efforts that we create that cause trouble for somebody else. And of course, at Yeshiva, the staff, the maintenance staff of Makor was a nightclub music performance space that he created, the foundation created to reach out to young Jews. They came and they cried. They said really he was the person, when he came and visited, when he supervised, he didn't just go to look at the crowd and at the audience and at the speaker. He came to them and said, what do you need? What's your problems? What's your issues? And of course, that was his style. That was his style in general, to be aware that Tselem Elokim and to take them very seriously. And of course, the same spirit, another part of his derech Avodat Hashem was Ahavat HaBriot. He loved people. Had an enormous number of friends, endless supply of friends. Remembered birthdays. Everybody. At 12:01 of the night, past midnight of your birthday, he'd call and say, I want to be the first one to wish you a happy birthday. Or just gifts. Like to give gifts, and it was not a question of a formal structure. His parents would call up, we are both deadheads, I don't know, the negative side, I don't mean that. I mean, we'd never get out. He would call and say, he got us to see Les Mis, Phantom Opera, all those, he loved those plays, he thought they were good, so he called up and said, you should see it, and here I got tickets for you, come with me. He would visit his friends in Israel. One friend told us after, he brought beanie bag baby dolls for his children. Well, when he did that, we found that after in his papers, he kept the list so he could rotate and make sure he didn't duplicate the same beanie bag or the same color each year. It was just a question of liking people and, of course, feeling that connection to them. And that Avodat Briot, of course, not to recruit, not to missionize, invited people for dinners Friday night. He just thought he would enjoy, they would enjoy, and he would share it with them. And thirdly, the way of joy. What's the way of joy? Avodat Hashem b'simcha. What does that mean? Well, it means simply, among other things he felt, to enjoy life, to embrace life. Yes, to appreciate a meteor shower, to just have the pleasure and the fun of walking and hiking and sharing the nature that God had created and which is part of our life. And then just simply the joy of life. He loved fun, loved humor, not to mention dancing on Simchat Torah or for that matter, Purim, or I remember visiting people in the hospital when they were sick. He would dress up with David Winter as Elvis and Elvis impersonators, and it was a combination of the fun and of the cheering of it, and that is also part of the whole notion of joy. We found the video of him dancing. He used to love to dance. He and his brother would do a lot of dancing, in front of the Kala at weddings. We had this one, it's an amazing video because you see he's not only dancing amazingly, but he's balancing a tennis ball can with 3 tennis balls on his head. And it's amazing, you see how he managed to balance it all the way through on these extreme angles. And then at the end, the video cuts and you see he's got it taped to his head, and everybody gets that and sort of gets the humor of the dancing. But that's the point. You're supposed to make the Kala and the bride happy and joy. That's part of the simcha of serving Hashem. And then there's the way of music. If it's Avodat Hashem b'simcha, that concludes Bo Lefanav Bernana with music. Again, he loved music. You're all too young to remember this. Casey Kasem, the top 40, would play the top 40 tunes from 40 down to 1. You could stop him any week, he'd tell you what we're up to number 36 and what it is. Just love music in general. And that love of music, I remember he called a friend last minute, 2 hours from here in Philadelphia, there's a Bruce Springsteen concert. I got tickets, pick him up and just drive him there. It's great music. And of course, that love of music led him to create, or the foundation to create, Makor, which was a music performance space. They discovered that young Jews in their 20s and 30s who weren't coming to shul or weren't coming to community centers, they were going to music performance spaces. So they created Makor as a kind of a music performance space, and you could come and eat dinner at the same place. Of course, you could then connect to a Jewish program, a class. He taught Hebrew at that club. I'll come back to that in a second. So the way of music. Then there was the way of the body. Rav Soloveitchik points out, halachic man, that one of the most distinctive things about our sense of Kedusha, is that we're not trying to escape from this life to a higher level of holiness up in heaven. It's the reverse. It's the notion of bringing holiness, presence of God, the fullness of life, the depth of morality into this life, into the body. And yes, the brachot hashachar, when you say in the morning, pokeach evrim, to wake up and appreciate sight, or mechim etzarei gover, it's to appreciate your muscles and they're moving in your body. It's asher yotzar as a bracha because the very fact that your body is digesting, assimilating, defecating is kind of part of the pleasure and physical health and joy of life. And the way of health also means exercise. He went to the gym and he played sports every week, loved bike riding because that was part of the enjoying the body. Just as God gave us an neshama tahora, he gave us a body, and that body is to express our own feelings and our own pleasure and joy in life. And then there was the way of Israel. The way of Israel, meaning he had a special love and feeling for Israel. After his death, we realized, looking back, he had made a neder, which he never told us about, to be in Israel 2 out of the 3 regalim every year, no matter what. And of course, he understood that his greatest professional contribution and experience was, as executive director of the foundation, was Birthright Israel, which you may have heard about. But the original idea of Birthright Israel was, Yossi Belin suggested, buy a ticket for every Jew in the world, young Jew, 18 years old, you get a round-trip ticket to Israel. But when he did the staff work, he came back and said, frankly, many wouldn't use it, and many would just dump it on the market and use the money for other purposes. Many would not go to Israel. But if you turned it into a group experience, when they had the connection and they went together, if you turned it into an educational experience, that would include education, not formal education necessarily, hiking and biking and climbing Israel, but getting to know its land, getting to know its history. Israel is the place where God is present in almost a physical way, where history is present, it's not past, it's real. So he was the one who not only turned it into an educational trip, but people questioned, 10 days, how can that have an impact? But of course he knew it and experienced it. He said, not only will it work, he said, my friends and I, they spent a gap year in Israel. He said, but really in a week, in a trip, in a short trip, your whole life can be transformed. And it's not just going to the wall. It's the living Israel. It's the community, because not only do you feel closeness to God, to Jewish people, to history, but in this place the Torah sinks in deeply. Somehow you're more respected, you absorb it more. He was absolutely convinced, and that's of course what happened, that 10 days could work. And of course, I mention all these different ways because again, when it comes up together and it adds up to the fact, it's the fact that he felt we should not, our community, our philanthropy was driven by this anxiety. Jews are assimilating, we're going to lose out, we're going to disappear. He felt the opposite. He felt we should not be driven by concern, by defensiveness. This is a joy, this is a pleasure, I'm sharing. Shabbat, music, tefillah, these were experiences of joy that one could share, and I'm giving you this as a gift. I don't have to feel the anxiety, will you take it, will you run away? He was absolutely convinced that if you live it this way, if you experience it this way, that people will choose. And that therefore we are living in a time when Avodat Hashem is no longer because we're excluded, no longer because we have an exclusive. We don't serve God because of fear or punishment, or for that matter, reward. Nor do we serve God out of anxiety that we want to stay Jewish and that we're not going to assimilate. He argued, this is a time when Avodat Hashem can be out of embrace of life. We say on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem is Elokim Chayim. Well, this is a time when one can embrace the God of life, living life, enjoying life, celebrating it, and sharing it with your fellow human beings who are the image of God. Thank you.